So if I rock the steering and put my hand on the spring, I can feel that spring jumping. Hello everybody. What we've got today, Ford Mondeo Mk4 2-litre diesel. Every time I turn the steering, you're getting like a twanging noise from the front suspension. On top of your front shock absorber struts or McPherson struts, there's a bearing that turns when you turn the steering, and I reckon that bearing has seized up. So I'm going to remove this shock absorber strut, take the bearing off and take a look at it. I'll need to get to these bolts under the bonnet, but that'll be a bit later. Let's not forget the old protection. I'm just going to remove this 13mm hub nut. Where the drive shaft slides into the splined hub, it can get rusty and they can seize up. So I don't know about this one, but I'm going to spray some oil in there for a little while, just to see if it helps it. There's an anti-roll bar drop link on the shock absorber with a 15mm nut, but the threads that are exposed, we need to clean them up before we undo them. So if you get a wire brush in there and give them threads a good clean up, and then it wouldn't hurt to spray a bit of freeing oil on them threads. You can hold these with a 5mm Allen key and undo them with a 15mm spanner, but they're pretty tight, so I'm just going to use an air gun. Bingo. Slide that out to one side. I'll just turn this steering round to the right. There are two 18mm bolts holding the brake caliper assembly to the hub, which we're now going to bang out. And you'll probably have to push your brake pads back a little bit of a lever, just so the whole brake caliper assembly can slide off. And then just remove your brake disc. I'll just straighten this wheel up again. There's a little tab here on your ABS sensor, which you push in, and then the sensor will push off. If a tab doesn't work, you can try getting the screwdriver underneath here and lifting the tab. Then the sensor should pull out. I'm just going to position this brake caliper on top of the hub just for a minute and turn the steering round to the right again. 21mm nut holding the bottom ball joint onto the hub. Once again, give the threads a bit of a clean with a wire brush. It does help. And spray them threads with a bit of freeing oil. And then you can whack this nut off with a 21mm spanner. Okay, we just whack that steering round to the left. Your steering track within nut, the exposed threads, you'll need to clean them up with a wire brush because they can get pretty damn rusty, and give them threads a bit of a spray of oil as well. 21mm nut and we'll whack it off. I'm going to hit this with a hammer to free this tapered joint. So I'm just going to put the nut back on the threads a few turns, just in case I miss. I don't want to damage the threads. That's it. Same thing here. I'm going to whack this piece of the hub so I can break the taper on the bottom ball joint. You know, when it comes to hammers, there's nothing like a genuine piece of hickory. So once the taper's broken, I'm going to slide a bar between the subframe and the bottom arm, and then just prise the bottom ball joint out of the hub. Okay, we need to knock the drive shaft out through the back of the hub. If you don't have an air chisel to do this, you might try using a punch and a hammer. And you can pull that straight out. Your flexible brake hose is pushed into a bracket on your shock absorber strut. So what we're going to do, pop this hose out, and then we're going to push our whole brake caliper and lay it on top of our bottom arm. Out of the way. Right, I just lower the car back down to the ground then. There's a little plastic screw on your scuttle panel. In all honesty, it's a whole lot easier if you just remove it. There's another little plastic screw here, which we'll have to take out, and a wiring connector you can just pull out the way. And now you can just lift this scuttle panel up, pull this piece of plastic to one side, and stick something underneath the scuttle to hold it up. What that's done is give us access to the rear bolt on our shock absorber turret. So with a 10mm socket, you can now remove these three 10mm bolts. So with that last nut out of the way, you can remove the whole strut. I have this spring now fully compressed, so the shock absorber is under no tension of this spring. You're probably best lifting up this boot cover so we can see our shock absorber pin, sticking a pair of mole grips on it. When I undo the top nut on this strut, these mole grips will hold the centre shock absorber pin from spinning with a nut, and also it's going to stop the shock absorber from falling out through the bottom of the spring. Right, this is where you really do need to pay attention, otherwise you can get these totally wrong. There's a hole in this top plate, okay, and you'll see there's a little tab here and another little tab. Both these tabs should line up with this hole. These two tabs and that hole should all be in line, and as we come down, them tabs have to line up with this ridge just here. If you don't align the tabs on that bearing assembly with the ridge on that shock absorber, chances are you will be able to put it back onto the car, but I'm telling you, it will cause you nothing but steering problems. So it is pretty imperative that all them marks are lined up properly. If you can get a wire brush on the shock absorber strut top threads, then do so, because they do tend to rust up a little bit, and give it a dousing of oil. Okay, 18mm socket, and we'll whack this top nut off. And then this whole mount assembly will just lift off. And as you can see, our shock absorber and spring is still pretty much in one piece, so we can put it back together easier. This boot will literally pull off our bearing assembly, and chances are the bump stop will be inside the boot. We'll put this bump stop back on in a minute. So you see the spring is going to sit here where my hand is, and then these two halves of the bearing will turn when you turn the steering. I think what's happened is a whole load of ball bearings that run inside this casing, and I think they've got rusty, and I can feel them. As I turn them, they feel really rough. I'll split this open in a minute so we can have a look at the bearings. So obviously when there's load on this bearing and it's being compressed, that's when it's getting really like notchy like that. Right, first up, this bearing will actually separate from the bush. Okay, I've just split this bearing in half just to have a little look. There's still plenty of grease in there, but you know what? That actually feels pretty damn rough. And there's our bearings, tiny little ball bearings. I reckon the chrome case hardening has just been worn off these bearings, and they're just rough now. Anyway, that's it. Not a lot to see really. Bye-bye. So how much do you reckon this top mount costs? Ta-da! £52.67. Daylight bloody robbery. Wow. So you'll notice we've got two pieces. The first piece, which is our bearing assembly, just make sure you line the two tabs up together. The second piece, which is our bush, there's a flat piece at the back. That's where our tabs have to line up, and that will push on there. So now our two tabs are lined up with the hole along the flat at the back of our bush. The piece of rubber that our spring is going to sit on we'll have to remove from the old bearing and position it onto our new bearing. Remember that bump stop? That now pushes in to our bearing, and that boot will just slide over and clip onto the bearing outer casing, and now we can slide the whole lot back onto our shock absorber and get your nuts started on the threads. Okay, I'm just going to whack this nut down nice and tight and remove these mole grips. Make sure the base of your coil spring is sitting in the recess it's supposed to sit in the shock absorber strut. Remember to align these two tabs up, and once again make sure them two tabs are lined up with the recess on the shock absorber strut base. Now I can lift our whole assembly out of the spring compressor. It would probably help if you had an assistant to refit this strut back in the car. So you've got one person sliding the strut under the wheel arch and another person putting the bolts back in on top of the shock absorber strut. Okay everybody, refitting that strut assembly is obviously just a reversal of taking it apart. I don't actually think there's anything more important I need to say. So that just leaves one thing left to say. Till the next time, see ya.